welcome to the Startup Grind.
The second Startup Grind Ireland, where tonight we present Paddy Cosgrave of Web Summit and F.ounders. We were lucky enough to get Paddy 7 days before his next event, Dublin Web Summit, and he's going to talk to us tonight basically about his career since he left college and basically give us kind of an insight into his life and what he has been doing since that time. So I'd like to get everyone to put a nice hand together for Paddy Cosgrave. I bet this feels odd. You're on the wrong side of the question plot tonight, no?
Feels strange.
Do you want to put the mic there?
Oh yeah, I'll do it.
Just a little mute.
Hello?
Yeah. It's
Oh, should I change it up?
on the top.
Oh yeah.
Hello.
So Paddy, God almighty, here we are, 7 days before Dublin Web Summit 2012. I'm just going to ask you, what can we expect next week? Because I've never been before, a lot of people in this room have never been before, and from what I understand it's changed a lot, even since the last one.
First, what would be like? It'd probably be shit. Wi-Fi won't work. Every German there will have a great time. And Irish people will leave and go, that's so shit, that's a scam. No, so what do I think it'll be like? So there should be about 3,500 people there, so we've passed about 3,000 attendees. About half of those attendees are coming from Ireland, the rest are coming from all over the world, and from as far away as Japan, Brazil, Mexico. We have 260 startups exhibiting in the startup village. 100 of those are pitching. Some of them aren't pitching because they're maybe too far advanced, so some of them are demoing, and some of them are beyond that again, so they're not doing that. The number of Irish startups is maybe about 50 startups. And then over the 2 days there's just over 200 speakers. They're divided into kind of 5 stages. So there's 2 stages for startups, 1 stage for developers, 1 stage for enterprise type people, older people in suits, and then there's another stage for social media people who are older people who should really wear suits, but they're trying to trick us by being cool. And then there's kind of a main stage. There's kind of not really a main stage in a sense, because the speakers on the other stages are like incredible. On the developer stage, you got guys like the creator of MySQL, and on the digital stage, you got Wael Ghanem, who I guess was probably, you know, the revolution in Egypt was technically leaderless, but if there was anybody who was ultimately behind elements of it, especially online, it was this guy, and he's one of Time's Men of the Year or People of the Year last year. So there's kind of something for anybody. I guess it's kind of come maybe a long way. Even last year, I think the event was pretty shit. So from a networking point of view, most people come to events not to hear the speakers. If you really want to hear the speakers and you're passionate about hearing from the founder of Skype or YouTube or Pinterest, who may be there, may not be there, he will be there. So, you know, you can ultimately turn on YouTube and you can read a few blogs. So when most people come is actually to network. And I guess last year, and it's not just the Web Summit, I think most conferences at scale fall down. When there's 100 people like here, it's very easy to find people that are similar to you and to just get to know people and build a valuable network. But as an event jumps to 500 people, suddenly the attendee list becomes slightly meaningless. How do you actually kind of comprehend an attendee list and make use of it? And then it goes to 3,000 people and it's just totally meaningless. What's the point even in publishing an attendee list? So one of the things we didn't do last year, and most conferences at scale don't do, is we don't try to pre-schedule any meetings. So we have pulled data on every single one of our attendees. We gather data on our attendees first based on where they're from. Then we take their email address, run that through Intercom, which is an Irish company that has a relationship with full contact, so we can use full contact's API for free without paying them. Then we pull that information out of full contact of a special relationship with Twitter, so they have additional privileges or API access above what a normal developer has. So we pull people's Twitter profiles, then we take the Twitter profile and we run through the cloud, and then we build this massive, like 30 or 40 column wide profile of individual people. Then we're going out to people, asking people, do they want to do speed networking, for example, and then they say, oh, I want to meet so and so, or I want to meet so and so, and then we start kind of optimizing the optimally distributing people and assigning them to meetings. So we should have our target is to do 10,000 pre-scheduled meetings. So what does that mean? Before the event next week, the day before, people will get an email that says, here are your times for your meetings over the next 2 days. These are the people you're meeting. So we've got 200 investors from all over the world, from Sequoia to Kleiner Perkins to Excel to Google Ventures, and all of those partners will have endless meetings, non-stop all day. And so it means that the startups on the other side will have meetings non-stop all day as well, or within reason. And if you're a brand or an agency in the digital marketing space, it's the same. If you're a developer and you really want to meet startups, irrespective of whether they're in Ireland or anywhere else, there's a facility to make that happen. And anyway, hopefully that makes it a bit better. But those are only kind of some of the elements.
Yeah, okay. So we'll do it chronologically. So we'll go back to 2006 when you left Trinity College, or slightly before that. Yeah. You were involved in the Philosophical Society in Trinity when you were there.
Yeah.
Was that like a prerequisite to running events and getting speakers? Who did you get, and did you find a love for what you've actually ended up doing now through that? Or tell us about that time and what you were thinking at that time about doing.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I'll go back I'll go back further. So I grew up on a farm in Wicklow. My dad is a dairy farmer. He milks cows during the day, and then he's a contributor to the kind of WordPress community. He makes WordPress plugins. He won't be at the Dublin Web Summit because he's going to fucking WordCamp in Toronto or something like that. Fucking asshole. So kind of when I was growing up, my dad was, I don't know, he was just obsessed with computers, and there was always lots of stuff in the house, games consoles, first PDAs, which were Science, and he didn't really want me to work on the farm, so he was always interested in getting me interested in computers and stuff like that. And then I went to secondary school, and we persuaded mainly my dad, that the school should teach programming. This was in 1996 or 1995 when I was 12. That they should teach just programming to all first years and second years, which happened in the school for a period of time. And then eventually, I kind of, my interest in programming drifted by the time I was 15. My only utility was to the 17 and 18-year-old boys who give me, guys in the school who give me dead arms if I didn't disable Net Nanny or whatever it was, so they could look at porn in the computer room. So then I got to college. I got involved with Phil, which is a speaker society. I also started kind of messing around, building things with a guy called Dave O'Loughlin. We started making a really, really, really shit social network for Trinity. And then discovered Facebook, and presumed it was built by people who were at least 30, and then turned out they were like younger than us. So we stopped immediately. And then there's another guy called Paul Campbell, who's a pretty amazing developer, and we were kind of messing around, just stupid things towards the end of college. So that was kind of always in the back of my mind. I'd never met a tech entrepreneur. I'd never met an investor. I don't know, maybe there were blogs in 2003 or 2004. I didn't come across them, but then at the same time I got involved in a society that brings speakers to Ireland. You've no money, all you have is basically a telephone and email, and you have to persuade people that they should fly across the Atlantic to come and speak to 100 students in Trinity. Which in many cases is actually easier than persuading them to come to Dublin to speak at a tech conference, because you're like 500 years of history and Americans fucking eat that shit alive.
The oldest society in the world.
So, yeah.
Okay, well, from then, you actually, from what I can see, you went on to found what has become the Undergraduate Awards of Ireland. Would that have been your first real, proper, formal venture of building something? Or
When I was in college, so the Phil's Debating Society, I didn't do any debating in college. There was no debating in my school. Everybody that was a debater had gone to the same set of girls or boys' schools, and if you didn't do debating in school, you're ultimately fucked by the time you came to college. Because if you went to enter any debating competition when you were 18, you're terrified, first of all, and then you're standing in front of a room with lots of smart people, and then the first 3 people that speak before you are class, and you're so crap, and so you never want to do it again. And so the first thing I did in college was, with a few debaters from UCD and Trinity who were actually good debaters, we put together a syllabus for schools that had never done debating before, and then launched a program across in about 200 schools in Ireland that has brought debating, which is public speaking, which is a useful life skill, to all of those schools. And that was kind of the first thing, I guess, at scale that we did. Then I left college. I was doing something, tinkering around with Paul Campbell with something, and abandoned Paul because I'd met this Irish entrepreneur who was incredibly charismatic, a little bit too charismatic, bordering on slightly crazy, but he was a very lovable, crazy man. And he persuaded me not to start a company, but instead to do something good. And he gave me an office in Stephen's Green and put 50,000 euros into an account that I could access at any time. I was like, this is 2007, and it was kind of during the crazy times. The Celtic Tiger was beginning to implode, and I just ignored him for ages, and then I was like, okay, I should do something. Didn't know what to do. What a good thing to do was then talk to some friends who were involved in politics. The turnout in elections had fallen every single election in Ireland for 35 years, so we decided to set up a campaign to encourage young people to vote. We took a brand from the United States called Rock the Vote. They wrote to us and said they'd sue us if we didn't see. They sent us a cease and desist letter to stop using their brand. Then I called them and said, this just looked really silly. We're ultimately just trying to get young people out to vote. Sorry for borrowing your brand. Can we just use it anyway? And they said, sure, you can use it anyway. So then we kind of launched this campaign, and the whole purpose of the campaign was supposed to be really kitsch and just like stupid, and deride the fact. We thought the Rock the Vote videos in the States, which were all about like get out and vote, were just like so patronizing and stupid. So we made these videos where everybody made a hand signal, and it was supposed to be like encouraging people to vote. And then a few bloggers didn't see the irony in it and thought it was actually real. But the videos were just deeply ironic. Anyway, so 12 weeks, we launched the campaign 12 weeks before the election, and straight away people started emailing saying, oh, this is really great, or leaving messages on our Bebo page and saying, oh, this is great, I'm going to vote. How do I find out who to vote for? I was like, oh, you should go to like Labour's website or Green Party or Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. Like, oh, I don't want to vote for any of those fuckers. I want to vote for an independent candidate. And you're like, oh, okay. I don't know how you find out about that. Maybe go to RTE's website. And then RTE couldn't publish a list of all the candidates until all the candidates had been declared, which is only a few weeks before the election, because otherwise they would bias the outcome of the election. And there's all this kind of broadcasting standards nonsense. So we decided, myself and a guy called Mick Cullinan, who's working with me again, decided we'd create this thing called MyCandidate, MyCandidate, which was totally not-for-profit. And all it would do is centralise information, every single candidate for the elections. We got another friend, Andrew Payne, he did all the research. We built the website, and then we launched it with 6 weeks out from the election. Then RTE rang us in the Irish Times and said, oh, could we take all the data that you've put together on all these candidates, so biographical information and policy stance and stuff like that. And we said, not really, but we will give it to you in a modified iframe. So YouTube video, if you put it on Facebook, it just shows it's an iframe ultimately you're embedding on your page. So we gave a modified iframe to both the Irish Times and RT and one or two other news websites that looked like the Irish Times was serving up all the data, but it was just coming straight off our stuff. So that was the first thing I did. And then after that, I went to the States to work with a lady called Ann Lewis momentarily, who was Hillary Clinton's director of communications while she was trying to get elected against Obama, or get nominated against Obama. They had an online campaign, and she was wondering such things as, why is Hillary getting no more friends on Facebook? And I was like, you're 60, are you on Facebook? She's like, no. And I was like, okay, that's probably your problem. should go to Silicon Valley and just recruit a dozen very young people in tech, and they'll tell you how to run your online campaign, which they never did, and I think to their detriment. So then I came back, tried to get funding from the European Commission to do MyCandidate and roll out across Europe. We couldn't get any funding because the European Commission was supposed to provide citizens with information, every candidate running every single election, but in reality they can't actually do that, because if they're to even begin to carry out research before every candidate is declared across every single EU country, they're biasing the outcome of the election, which means they can only begin to carry out their research about 4 weeks before a European election, which means there's no way they can even complete the exercise by the time the election comes. So we decided...
So you tried to monetize it based on the candidate actually wanted to be on the platform?
Yeah, so then we decided we would build a fucking absolutely shit thing called MyCandidate, which in order to create MyCandidate as a platform and pay for it, we would create a set of tools that candidates could use to sign up volunteers, solicit donations, and that would be a standalone website, but ultimately the value would be created when we partnered with Johnson Media Group in the UK or the Telegraph, and they would serve up profiles of all these candidates. We'd provide them with the information, and in return those candidates would be able to solicit donations and sign up volunteers directly off those websites. So we were creating a huge audience or huge reach or distribution for candidates that signed up to use the service.
So presumably it wasn't non-election time proof. So basically once the election was over, did you find yourself bothered to try and monetize further? Or what was the real detriment of the whole thing?
Kind of revenue kind of grew, lots of people signed up, and then the election happened, and some people were like, this is great. Other people that knew a little bit about tech were like, God, that was like, you should have spent more time building this product, it was terrible. And either way, whether they were happy or they weren't happy, they'd say, if they were happy, they'd say, oh, we'll start using the service again next election. You're like, oh, but no, don't cancel your credit card now. And so, I think it was too early. And now there is a proper platform that's an exact replica, essentially, of it, called Nation Builder. And the founder of that is a guy called Joe Green. And Joe Green created a website called FaceMash way back in the day with his only roommate, Mark Zuckerberg. And then they created something called Facebook, or the Facebook. And then Joe left after 4 months because his dad told him that Zuck was a crazy man. He should go back to Harvard. So,
what was your role in MyCandidate?
I just started it, and then a guy called Oisin Hanrahan got involved at the very start. And Oisin is this amazing Irish guy who's a really proper business-focused entrepreneur, and he'd done amazing things before. He's younger than me. He's just dropped out of Harvard he's doing an MBA to start a company that he's raised a whole lot of money for in the States. And my role was partly on product, partly just to keep everything away.
Okay, and from that perspective, what was the biggest thing that you learned from MyCandidate from that? Because presumably you found your feet a lot during that time.
It's just really hard. It's really hard to manage people. It's really easy when there's 3 people and you know what's going on, and then there's like 10 people, and you're like, fuck, what do I do with these 10 people? And then people ask you, what should we do? And you're like, shit, I don't know what they should do. And you're like, should I tell them? I don't know. And then they like totally lose faith, or should I kind of make something up? And is that worse? So that's you kind of have to start dealing with that. And then you're like, and then every time, so what's happened? So to come back to the Dublin website's grown a lot bigger, and so there's maybe 50 staff in the office now, and like every time the company goes from 3 people, everybody knows everything that's going on. You have these systems that you don't even decide what those systems are, and then it jumps to 10 people and everything starts not working, and you're like, fuck, we have to do formal meetings on Monday, so we all decide what we're doing, and then let's do kind of morning stand-ups, and we'll divide into two groups, and then you eventually figure that out, and then you hire 5 more people and everything collapses again. And then that just keeps happening.
And would you say
it's really hard to do?
I know I keep going back to MyCandidate, but I'm leaving it. So it got bought essentially. But aside from that, was it an amicable split for everyone that was involved, or what exactly was the feeling when you did get bought? Because from what I've heard you say before, that it wasn't exactly the most glorious.
So as happens with most startups, they'll end up burning a hole in the ground before either shutting down or making money. And in the case of MyCandidate, all they were doing was assuming all the debt that we had racked up that would be outstanding. So it wasn't in any way a good thing. People say failure is great. They're totally lying. That's absolute bullshit. Failure is probably the worst thing in the world. It's like terrible. So people saying it's good to fail, you learn a lot from failure. The main thing you learn is like, whatever you do, try not to fail again. It's really terrible.
So you obviously weren't discouraged by the fact that by the time that you had got MyCandidate going that it ultimately failed. You weren't like, it wasn't long before you got up on the bandwagon and started doing Web Summit. From what I gather, it started off as a movement.
Yeah.
In Trinity College. Tell us the brief, just give us the prelude, I suppose, to how Web Summit started and how the idea came about.
I think there were a few different things happening. So on the one hand, at the time there were tech events organised in Ireland, and you might somehow go to them, pay like €200, and you go and listen to the country manager of some technology company fulfilling service functions in Ireland talk about startups. You're like, this doesn't make any sense at all. This is shit. Like what's happened in Ireland in the last 3 years, so much has changed. Stuff like this just didn't exist 3 years ago. Honestly, didn't exist. It was like nothing. And so that was kind of in the back of my head that there were events in Ireland. Some of them were good, but they could be a whole lot better. And they were so focused on the same Irish speakers. And very seldom would they have guys like Ray Nolan or Chris Horn that had actually built tech companies out of Ireland. Instead, there was all these obsession with EMEA director of some US technology company. Don't get me wrong, those people are amazingly skillful managers that just don't have much to do with entrepreneurship or creating the type of businesses that are being created in here. So that was kind of in the back of my head. As MyCandidate was winding down, I'd organised basically a junket in Dublin with the heads of online of Sky, Le Monde, The Telegraph, RTBF, and a number of customers of MyCandidate. And the guys that bought MyCandidate had no interest in doing that, so I decided to assume responsibility for their junket and tried to offset the cost of that by getting them to host, getting them to speak, and that turned out to be a complete disaster. And the first conference was terrible, and it didn't really work, and lost money, didn't break even.
I'm beginning to see a pattern here. You're very hard on yourself.
Yeah.
And like, I suppose really what we've seen over the last year is we've seen you take the Web Summit to London. We've seen F.ounders, which we'll talk about in a little while, go to New York. Like Dublin Web Summit has become obviously a very traditional conference, but what is next? Can you make this a more mobile entity? Can it go elsewhere? Can it mushroom anymore in Ireland? Has it really reached its full potential scale-wise in Ireland? Or what do you have? What's your vision for it for the next 3 to 5 years?
So I think a lot of people say, why are you doing the Web Summit in Ireland? It's like too big for Ireland, just move out of Ireland, the market is so small, you should just focus on London, forget about Ireland, you're just wasting your time, the economy is shrinking, people don't have any money, if you want to build something that's sustainable, go to London. And there's a lot of very persuasive arguments to do that. So we did go to London this year and did do a London Web Summit, and we launched it 5 weeks before the actual event. Started selling tickets at £500 for a one-day event with pretty average speakers compared to what's going to happen in Dublin. There's absolutely no problem, sold out, no problem, 1,000 plus tickets. And the people are used in London and continental Europe paying 2,000 to 3,000 euros to go to a comparable conference, and £500 was absolutely nothing. And so suddenly you're like, Jesus, maybe all these people are right. But then you look at events like Cannes. In Cannes, there are lots of conferences at scale. Cannes is not a global city. It's not a Paris, it's not a London, it's not a New York, yet people have managed to build huge events. And I really feel that just because Dublin is not a global city, because it's a tier 2 city, doesn't mean it can't have the biggest startup and tech conference, not just in Europe but in the world. So there's nothing left in Europe. By the time we stop selling tickets next Tuesday, there won't be a startup or tech conference in Europe at the same size as the Dublin Web Summit. There are one or two events in the States, but I see no reason why the Dublin Web Summit or the summit can't grow to a 5,000-6,000 person event, and in growing bigger all the time, why it can't become more efficient, why it can't become more focused on particular groups of people, in connecting those particular groups of people over those 2 days. I just see no reason why you can't persuade people from all over the world to fly to Dublin, except for the fact that it turns out that even though London is twice as expensive as Dublin for almost everything else, it's actually more expensive to produce a conference in Dublin because there's effectively monopolistic and cartel-like practices between caterers and venues. So just so you're aware, if you want to do a conference in the RDS, you can only work with one caterer, and that caterer can charge you whatever the fuck they want. So as an example, I can go across to Insomnia, across the road from the RDS, and I will pay €3.75 for a big cup of coffee or a latte and a big pastry. If you want to do it in the RDS and you want to negotiate really hard with them and do massive volumes and feed 3,500 people, they'll charge you €4 for a cup of tea and a mini pastry that's that size. And that has to stop in Ireland. There could be so many more conferences here because this is a great city. It's so manageable. People that do conferences around the world, if they do it in London, that conference is lost in London. If you do a big global conference in Dublin, it takes over the city, and the experience of all the delegates is massively transformed. But right now, the guys across the water, the guys in the RDS, and a few other venues, there's just obscene the types of practices that are going on, and that's really disappointing. But despite all that, all I want is for the Dublin Web Summit to be far bigger than it is this year, next year. We have some kind of Hollywood film directors coming this year. We have some guys from the music industry, and we're going to expand those out of streams. We're also going to expand and get more focused for developers. And yeah, I think there's lots of value.
Look, I mean, you've given obviously some fairly candid opinions on Ireland, and you've given some candid opinions on other parts of the world for running tech conferences. But let's say that you've spent a hell of a lot of time with communities and ecosystems in other places in the world, like Berlin, in San Francisco, in London. Let's just take it from Paddy's lateral view of the world, his lateral perspective, if you like. If you weren't Paddy Cosgrave that ran the Web Summit and had all these awesome connections and knew everything that you've learned as a result of doing so, if you were launching MyCandidate tomorrow, having known everything that you know but not being you, what would you do differently? Would you start in Ireland? And if so, how would you go about it in terms of investors, in terms of being around the right ecosystem? What are you feeling on an international scale? Where is it at?
So I don't know, who here is from Dublin? And, okay, well, who here is not from Dublin? And keep your hand up if you're from outside of Ireland. So that's quite a few people. So I'm going to start off just macro and kind of work my way down to the specifics. So first of all, I think 3 years ago, having not been to other cities, I would have thought, oh wow, San Francisco must be like the Mecca. It's got to be the place that I need to get to. And Dublin's got so much wrong with it. And Enterprise Ireland, big problems, and IDA, big problems. So then I go out and I go around and travel to other cities and get to see how other ecosystems work. I went to 20 cities in Europe alone in June and July of the summer, and I think Ireland or Dublin is the city most similar to San Francisco. If San Francisco is something that's unique in terms of its scale, then Dublin has that as well. If you're in London, there are massive problems doing a startup, despite the cartel practices I'm talking about in Ireland. In London, it's so expensive to start a company. It's so expensive to rent an office anywhere reasonable. It's so expensive to do so many things. Not only that, the city is so big, you're so lost in that city, it's so hard to find a community. Even though they say, oh, everything's in East London, that's not the case at all. There's startups scattered all over the place. And for them to meet, like people meeting here this evening, it's so difficult. So I think, just first of all, I think Dublin is genuinely a great place. And there's a great concentration of talent here. And so I think it's a really good place, really good sized city. Secondly, I'm going to keep moving down to the specifics then. Secondly, so a lot of the discussion about EI and criticism people would have is in a vacuum, a complete vacuum of people who have no experience meeting and dealing with the types of people that work for the equivalent agencies elsewhere in the world. And I can categorically say that Enterprise Ireland are the best at what they do. There's no state agency that I've ever come across in Europe that's anywhere close to being as dynamic as Enterprise Ireland is, given the constraints of being essentially a kind of a state agency. They're very, very, very good at what they do. You could say they're the worst of a bad bunch if you want to be very, very harsh, but I genuinely think they're very, very good. And there might be some people in there who aren't great, but that's the same in every private company or any entity. And when it comes to the IDA, for whatever reason, the IDA also happen to be much more effective, in my experience, watching them operate, than their equivalents elsewhere in Europe. So you go to some event in New York and you see Barry O'Dowd working a room, and you see somebody from Denmark and somebody from Israel working the room, and they're like very stiff. Barry, meanwhile, is downing pints and he's getting stuck in and pulling people over to a corner and saying, burning the ear off them, and that's only part of the work that they do, but they're very effective in what they do. So I do think the state agencies around the ecosystem that is Dublin are very effective in what they do if you are to compare them to other agencies in other countries. So first of all, we have the city, then we have the kind of agencies, then we have all the incubators like these, which in Dublin I think are fantastic as compared to other cities. I go to other cities, and even you go to Berlin, and there's some kind of haphazard, and it's almost like there's just like endless warehouses that are incubators, and there's no real structure behind them, and there's ultimately nobody with experience. When you come to Ireland, there's actually a lot of entrepreneurs that have built tech companies at scale, and there are those global tech companies that happen to be here that in certain instances can be of help to you. So coming back to the specifics of what I do differently, I think I'd definitely start a company in Dublin. I am doing that right now, building another product with a number of other people. I think I wouldn't be as quick to launch a product as we did with MyCandidate. I think spend more time reading and listening to people, less time just doing.
What would you say about, I know that Ireland has become this great haven for actually getting a business validating, building product, and obviously getting funding through those agencies that you cited. But in terms of launching a product to a market, what do you think of this idea that startups should trial their products in Ireland and then migrate to markets in, say, the UK or America? What do you personally think of that idea?
Who the fuck came up with that idea? We keep spreading it around. Why? It depends on what product that is. I don't really know. It doesn't, you're holding an iPad. You can have a product in pretty much every country in the world in 3 weeks, 2 weeks, depending on Apple's. You can have it in the Android store in 5 minutes. The kind of trial market. So for example, for us actually, we do A/B testing, and the site that you see in Ireland is actually different to the site you'll see if you're accessing the Web Summit from Europe. So you can try that by using something like Hide My Ass, or if you're from the Arab world and look at porn all the time, you'll know the different services to use. There's just kind of anecdotal differences that women. So we had a version of the website previously that had a female investor on the front of it, and for whatever reason that converted. The engagement levels for Irish people were much, much higher than if you use that sexy investor on to any other IP address from outside of Ireland accessing it. And when we also changed the headline from, we basically started with investors from all over the world to meet Irish startups and investors, that also had a very considerable increase in engagement levels, which is quite interesting.
Okay.
Anyway,
what do you feel about Irish investors in comparison with the likes of the VCs that you meet in the US and in the UK? You've been fairly outspoken about them before. I remember the little thing on Twitter that I got caught in the middle with Leo. What are you generally thinking about Irish investors at the moment and their manner with startups?
So Irish investors,
generally.
Irish investors. Yeah. Okay. Well, there's there are investors, and then there are investors that invest. There's a number of things to remember. Okay, so I'll talk about the investors first. I think from what I see, again, for the scale of Ireland, like getting together a group of investors in France, which is a massive country compared to Ireland, and getting together a room of active investors in Ireland, which is a tiny country, and put them over here and put them over here. If you're to do a kind of a comparable ratio, the number of active Irish investors, whilst it might appear absolutely very, very small, proportionally speaking, it's much greater than in most other countries in Europe. And there are a lot of, there's lots of investors that you don't hear about that are actually quite active and that actually make real investments in real companies all the time. And those are guys like Atlantic Bridge, Oyster, I guess Shay Garvey and Will Prendergast have got a new fund, and Mr. McQuillan, and they'll be making investments. So I'm quite positive about it. But I'm also very positive that London is so close and it's so easy to get on a plane and go to Balderton, or try and get a meeting with Index, or try and get a meeting with Excel or Fidelity. And when you do that, if you walk into their offices, you'll see on their walls that they've invested in a disproportionate number of Irish companies, in my view, relative to the size of the United Kingdom. So you've got companies like Nuvei, Hostelworld, and Cartroller, tons of these Irish companies. So I don't know. I'm kind of positive. I wouldn't be negative. I think you also got to be careful. You should do your homework on people, and there are lots of people, not just in Ireland, but absolutely everywhere in Silicon Valley, who are, there's a little bit more to them. There's a lot of hype and not a lot of delivery. So just
would you say that anywhere in the world, is there any particular group of investors by geographical characteristic that bounce around an investment a lot more and do more of a dance and are far more prudent and a lot less active? Would you feel that that's the way that Ireland is? Is that what I'm getting, or would you feel that we're a lot more?
Yeah, I guess people say that about Europe in general, that maybe investors it's a better environment to be an investor in Ireland because the valuations or in Europe in general are lower than in the United States, so it's a good place to be an investor. If you take it from that point of view, then maybe as a startup, maybe it's not a good thing because you'll get a better valuation for your company in the United States if it's to get funded. But there, I mean, I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because of law in Ireland. Maybe it's cultural.
Sure.
I don't really know, but it's also an incredibly small country, so the pool of money that's ever going to be available is going to be very low. But ultimately, if you've a good idea, there are great companies from Croatia, from Czechoslovakia, from Slovenia, from Slovakia, from Estonia getting funded, in London or in the United States. It's capital is no longer tied to local markets. It's increasingly global, and whether you're Fred Wilson or Jim Breyer. Those guys are making investments all over the world. They're no longer tied to one particular geography. And there are a few VCs that are really leading that charge. And I think Atomico, which is a guy called, led by Nicholas Sennstrom from Skype, they'll go anywhere. They go to Turkey, they go to Estonia, they fly to Japan to find great ideas. Great ideas no longer just come from Silicon Valley. They can come from anywhere because the costs of creating certainly consumer products are now so cheap. Two guys in the middle of a mountain in Slovakia that can build something awesome and get it to market very, very quickly.
So when we're on that point, tell us about T.rigger, because I know from what I know, it's an online ticketing platform that you've used for your pub summits across Europe, and it's got a real social kind of integration kind of thing going on. But tell me first of all what your involvement is in it, and how it differs from the likes of an Eventbrite, for example.
So the T.rigger product, the ticketing platform, and everything else is not actually what the product is at all. That was just a kind of 2 or 3 day hack to ensure that we no longer paid 2.5% to Eventbrite, which when you're processing a lot of tickets across events in the US, London and Ireland ends up being like literally an entire person's salary for a year. So we were able to negotiate the prices down and then get more flexibility with PayPal. So we just built a ticketing platform that works better for us and works on mobile, which Eventbrite doesn't necessarily do. But we've been trying to integrate. Stripe isn't available in Ireland yet, which is unfortunate. We've been trying to integrate, and we've been waiting. It's like 4 months to, I don't know. Relex is an amazing company and moves very fast, and they're held back by AIB Merchant Services, which is like, I don't know how long it takes to do whatever they need to do, but it takes a really long time for them to do whatever they need to do. So we would just have straight credit card payments, but unfortunately we may have it on Tuesday of next week, which is a little bit too late.
So are you going to launch this as a consumer product for yourselves, or?
Yeah, so I'm kind of, I look at products like Path and Eventbrite, or I look at products like Path and I think they're amazing. It's like Facebook done right on mobile, but I don't think mobile isn't so much about consuming as a desktop or laptop is. Mobile is more about utility. So so many of the apps that we use on our mobile devices enhance our lives. They contribute in a very utilitarian point of view. We still use our phone to consume content, don't get me wrong, but I think there's a whole layer of utility, social utility, that doesn't exist. So you think about getting a group of 8 or 9 friends around your house for a barbecue on a Friday night. Just ask yourself, what do you still use? You don't use Eventbrite. This is a weirdly formal way to get people around to your house. please sign up here, and it's optional to fill in your mobile number. And doing it by text message is fine, but then you're over in Tesco or something, and you're like getting text like, "Can I bring my mate?" And you're like, "Fuck, how many people are coming?" And there's all the time, everywhere, people get together, and people are incredibly social. And when you look at the utilities that enable us to get together, they're few and far between on smartphones, on mobile, and we still default to text message and email, which is perfectly fine when 2 or 3 people are getting together. It's perfectly fine, but I think there's this huge market between 2 and 3 people and 20 people.
So it's very micro, very social, and it's completely consumer.
Yes.
Okay, sounds cool. So let's just brush over Founders. It's not something I know an incredible amount about. So let's talk about Founders and what goes on at Founders, because I've heard stories of Bono leading pub crawls through Dublin City. I've heard late night dance offs with Jack Dorsey and Nicholas Enstrom. Tell us first of all, what those guys are like when they're in the room together, and what you plan to do with them.
So I'll just explain what Founders is. Founders is the luckiest, flukiest, bizarre thing that's will ever happen to me ever. It was just a basic idea of trying to persuade the founders of the kind of fastest growing tech companies from all over the world to come together in one place, less anybody else, for 2 days once a year. And there's some amazing events organized around the world already, as of before 2010, but they're very regionally focused. So it could be like events in the US, or there's 1 or 2 events in Europe, but they bring together Europeans, or they bring together Americans, or they bring together Indians or Chinese. And so Founders was about creating something that was global, that cut out the CEOs of car companies or oil companies or people with 20 of their 19th century business models, and just focused on tech and mainly kind of web. And so it's 2.5 days. It happens to take place in Dublin, and most of they're just totally normal guys. Like they're kind of like, most of them don't like it. Some of the stuff is kind of it's almost weird. Like when you think that Nicholas Enstrom from Skype, 5 years ago he had nothing but all his clothes in a backpack and an apartment that he shared with his wife, his business partner, a 1.5 bedroom apartment that he shared with his co-founder and both their wives in London, while they were, or 6 years ago, while they were just kind of still hacking away in Skype before it was bought for the first time. And people I don't think very few of these guys kind of forget that. So that none of them are kind of corporate, None of them spent 25 years trying to climb a ladder and being like beaten down every step of the way, and then get promoted slowly and slowly, and then they become CEO of whatever company. And they're very expectant that the world owes them something. I don't think any of these I don't think most entrepreneurs don't change. It's irrelevant to them whether they have. Some of them it's important, but most of them it's genuinely, and I'm not trying to sugarcoat it, I think it's irrelevant to them whether they have 10 euros in their bank account or 100 million. It just doesn't change most of these guys. Most of them don't go to fancy restaurants. They feel really awkward about it. They don't embrace, luxury. You can take extreme examples like Dustin Moskovitz, who's worth 3 or 4 billion. He won't travel business class. There's a group of guys, so Joe Green, the guy behind Nation Builder, and Michael Birch, who founded Bebo. They were going to Burning Man, and they had a lovely RV, and they asked Dustin if he'd like a bed in the RV, and he's like, oh no, that's kind of like, I don't want to get into all that kind of stuff. It's a slippery slope. And instead, with his kind of 4 billion, stayed in his own, in a tent, in a sleeping bag, at Burning Man. And actually, a lot of those guys are like that. They do it because they're passionate about ideas, and not comparing bank accounts or having fancy jets or yachts or anything like that.
But what exactly do you guys do for those 36 or 48 hours that you do? Like, is it workshops? Is it collaborative? Is it just social? What happens?
Group masturbation. Once being recorded.
It's going to be on YouTube tomorrow. TechCrunch tomorrow.
So it's very. I think there's some talks and panel discussions on various different issues. So for most of the guys, it's not about the founder of Angry Birds getting up and talking to the guy who founded Cut the Rope or PopCap or some other gaming company and telling him what's what. It doesn't. That wouldn't really work. So instead, it's just discussions about kind of slightly broader issues. And for a lot of the guys, they never actually get a chance to hang out with each other. But any entrepreneur, whether they've sold Skype for 8 billion or haven't sold any company, but they're an entrepreneur, there's this really kind of kindred spirit where they just they really appreciate hanging out with each other. And a lot of them are friends and they're reconnecting, and a lot of them build valuable friendship. And sure, some there's real business deals that come out of it, but those are indirect and they're not important. So last year a charity got up and spoke about something they were trying to do in Africa, and one of the founders just basically said, "I'll give $3 million to that," which is kind of great, but that's actually not what Founders is about. There were 2 deals that were signed with investors in the Shelburne Hotel. So there was like $37 or $38 million in investment signed based on meetings that happened at Founders last year. But it's not what it's about.
It's more a byproduct than
it's a byproduct. It's just like this. It's about entrepreneurs getting together. There's a huge amount of value in that because for a number of reasons. One, every entrepreneur carries a very, very similar network to almost every other entrepreneur, and there's huge overlap, I think, and benefit to one entrepreneur sitting down with another entrepreneur and basically saying, I am facing problems, because most entrepreneurs all the way along they face problems because they're doing stuff for the first time. They're either managing a lot of people for the first time, they're trying to break into a new market for the first time, they're trying to stop a clone eating their market share in Germany for the first time, and they've never come across that. Nobody else understands a lot of those challenges except another entrepreneur behind another company, and that applies maybe every step of the way at every point of scale inside a company. If that wasn't the case, even the kind of fiercest of rivals like Steve Jobs or Bill Gates, they were still somehow good friends. And Larry Ellison was good friends with Steve Jobs, but Steve Jobs was also good friends with lots of other entrepreneurs who hadn't achieved the things that Larry Ellison had achieved, and he really appreciated hanging out with other entrepreneurs. And there's just a kind of I'm not trying to create a cult of entrepreneurs here, but there's kind of I think there's just good reason for that. I don't know. It's like emotional
Summit is
self-help.
certainly optimised for that this year, as you alluded to earlier on. So, Paddy, it's been a pleasure. I'd like to thank you for coming along. Are there any more speakers that you haven't announced that you may want to take the opportunity to do so now?
I think the main thing is it's very rare for investors from pretty much every major VC in the world and most of the leading angels to come to Dublin. I think that's a reasonable opportunity. We're doing a lot to try and facilitate people meeting with as many of those investors as possible. There's people at the Web Summit, I guess, that we haven't really announced or pushed. There's guys like Jawed Karim, who was the co-founder of YouTube. He was the technical guy behind it. He was the first investor in Palantir, Eventbrite, Airbnb. He's only 32, but he's a very quiet, low-key guy, and he's just really interested in investing in technical people who are building products. And anyway, so he'll be there. Paul from Pinterest will be there, who we haven't announced either, I guess. He's also investing. And I don't know. I'd hope the Dublin Web Summit's got lots of problems, but I kind of hope that it's a reasonable opportunity. I don't know. Is anybody going here? Anybody going? A few people. And anybody that's not, and they're a legitimate startup or they're a female developer. Are there any female developers here? Shit, it's true, they don't exist. I'd be happy to try and help make it more reasonable to attend. And then the final thing is, if you have no money and you just want to crash parties, there's 7 or 8 parties on Dame Lane on Wednesday night from about 8 o'clock. Guys like Google Ventures, NEA, Dine, HubSpot, SoundCloud, engineers, lots of people throwing parties, and pretty much everybody will be there. So if you just want to try and flag your way past some security people or something like that, you can just.
Awesome.